Hello everyone. Welcome back. Today, we've got some crucial news you don't want to miss. Let's dive right into the top financial headlines and break down what's happening. Today is Thanksgiving Day, and I wish you all a happy Thanksgiving. Our next entry is about thanks. Gratitude and reflection, what America can be thankful for this Thanksgiving. In a time of intense political division and uncertainty, it's easy to forget the many things that make America great. Today, I'd like to share a piece from the Wall Street Journal titled "America Has Much to Be Thankful For," which highlights some of the reasons we should be grateful, despite the polarized climate. For many, America's image abroad is often colored by perceptions of arrogance or self-satisfaction, but this article reminds us that there are still countless reasons for Americans to appreciate what we have. Here's a breakdown of some key points from the article, and why they resonate with me, especially as we head into the Thanksgiving holiday. 1. The integrity of the electoral system. The article starts by acknowledging the contentious elections and disputes that have marked this political season, but it ultimately highlights an important point: the resilience of the democratic process. We've come through a controversial election season, and while tensions were high, the results were accepted without resorting to widespread legal challenges. Despite the polarization, the article notes that the country still has a tradition of accepting the outcome of elections, even when divided. For the younger generation, especially, this offers a model of how democracy can work, regardless of the outcome. It's a reminder that the democratic process is bigger than any one person or party. It's a system of checks and balances that endures. 2. A 50-50 nation, but a stable one. The article points out something that many people tend to overlook: the United States is remarkably stable, despite being deeply divided. With a 50-50 split between the two major political parties, this country still functions relatively well, and this stability is something to be thankful for. Despite the frequent frustrations with both parties, the fact that we have two viable political parties and that most people can find a way to fit into one of them is a testament to the country's resilience. While both parties have let us down in various ways, something we all can agree on, it's also worth noting that we haven't fallen into chaos. The system continues to function because the American people largely respect the rules of democracy and embrace compromise when necessary. 3. The immigrant contribution. Perhaps one of the most significant sources of strength for the US is its immigrant population. The article reflects on how millions of immigrants, who followed the legal process, now call the US home, contributing to the political balance in the country. Their efforts bring new perspectives, and while debates continue over immigration policy, the fact remains that immigrants are a key pillar of American society. They bring innovation, labor, and diversity, which are all essential to our economic and social fabric. 4. The end of political extremes. Another insightful point the article makes is about the moderate mandate in recent elections. Despite the perception of a Republican wave, the article notes that the GOP's win is still a mild victory, particularly when it comes to swing states. In other words, it's a 50-50th country, and that's important because a highly polarized society is also a fragile one. What the article really underscores is that extremism has lost much of its foothold in American politics. Both the Republican and Democratic parties have their radical wings, but the middle ground remains crucial to keeping the country from veering into chaos. This balanced approach isn't just desirable, it's essential for the health of the nation. 5. Democracy isn't perfect, but it's ours. The article concludes with a point that, in my opinion, is especially timely: acceptance of the democratic process, despite its flaws. It's not about winning every battle or getting everything you want, but about trusting in the process. America is still a work in progress, but the American experiment is worth celebrating. The article emphasizes that, even though the system isn't perfect, it remains the best system we have for promoting fairness, justice, and opportunity. There's a quiet optimism in this reflection. America, with all its problems, remains a shining example of hope for many around the world. Even in our times of deep political and cultural divisions, this sentiment is what makes Thanksgiving so meaningful. A call for reflection, not division. What makes this piece powerful is that it doesn't glorify anyone or any party. It's about accepting the system we have and moving forward in a way that encourages civil discourse. It calls on both parties to reflect on their weaknesses and reassess how to make this country better for everyone, regardless of political affiliation. For the Republicans, it's a perfect time to engage more with moderates and find common ground where possible. For the Democrats, it's a reminder that they've lost touch with their core base, and unless they find a way to reconnect, they'll keep hemorrhaging support to the right. Final thoughts: America's resilience. The article reminds us that, despite everything, America is still a beacon of hope. We may be deeply divided, but there are still plenty of things to be thankful for, from the stability of our elections to the strength of our democracy. This is a time to reflect, to recognize that no matter how much we disagree, we are all part of something much larger than ourselves. So, as we approach Thanksgiving, let's take a moment to recognize how far we've come, and how much we still have to offer the world. Let's continue to uphold the values that make this country a place of freedom, hope, and opportunity for all. Happy Thanksgiving, America! What are you most thankful for this year? Let me know in the comments below. Next, let's dive into a recent Wall Street Journal article titled "Wall Street's Response to More Tariffs, Been There, Done That." Despite former President Donald Trump's bold announcement of significant tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and China earlier this week, the US financial markets barely flinched. This seemingly indifferent reaction has puzzled many, especially given the magnitude of the proposed tariffs. But the Wall Street Journal provides insights into why Wall Street is playing it cool, and there's more to it than meets the eye. 1. Learning from Trump's first term, the Twitter effect. One of the key reasons behind Wall Street's calm response is experience. Investors remember Trump's first term, when his Twitter feed routinely sent shockwaves through the markets. At the time, any unexpected tweet from Trump, whether about tariffs, trade wars, or policy shifts, could cause the Dow Jones to plummet or soar within hours. Days with 1,000-point drops became uncomfortably common. However, over time, Wall Street adjusted to Trump's style. Investors realized that while his rhetoric was often aggressive, it didn't always translate into immediate action. In fact, many of his bold proclamations either fizzled out or were heavily moderated during implementation. This cry-wolf effect taught Wall Street to take Trump's statements with a grain of salt, especially when they seemed designed to rattle opponents rather than set concrete policy. Another important factor is Trump's personal obsession with market performance. During his first term, he repeatedly highlighted stock market gains as a personal achievement. This self-interest reassures investors that he's unlikely to implement policies that would tank the markets. Adding to the market's comfort is the appointment of Scott Bessent, a Wall Street insider, as Treasury Secretary. With personal stakes in the market, Bessent is expected to temper any extreme moves that could hurt the economy or his own portfolio. 2. Extreme pressure, followed by negotiation. Wall Street's second insight is that Trump's playbook is predictable. His negotiation style is built around maximum pressure. He makes extreme demands, often as a way to extract concessions during negotiations. Investors see this as part of a broader strategy rather than an imminent policy shift. For example, in his first term, Trump threatened high tariffs on Mexico but quickly backed down after securing agreements on immigration controls. This week, after threatening a 25% tariff on all Mexican goods, Mexican President Claudia Rodriguez responded with a conciliatory letter, pledging to tighten border security and curb illegal immigration. Trump's reaction? He praised the letter, calling it satisfying. Investors know that similar deals will likely be struck with Canada and China, making the tariffs less of a certainty. 3. Trump's tough stance, effective or overkill. Trump's hardball tactics often seem reckless, but in some cases, they work, especially when dealing with countries like Mexico, which have long been criticized for turning a blind eye to illegal immigration. While previous administrations, including Biden's, tried a more diplomatic approach by sending Vice President Kamala Harris to negotiate with Central and South American nations, these efforts often fell flat. Despite promises and financial aid, the flow of migrants continued. Trump's approach? No negotiations. If migrants cross the border illegally, he threatens economic consequences for Mexico. This no-nonsense strategy has forced Mexico to crack down on immigration at its own border, effectively blocking the pipeline of migrants from Central and South America. Whether you agree with Trump's methods or not, it's hard to argue with the results. 4. Wall Street's gamble, betting on a deal. Despite Trump's tough rhetoric, Wall Street is betting that cooler heads will prevail. Investors believe that negotiations will soften the blow of any new tariffs, and deals will be struck that avert economic chaos. They also know that timing is key. Trump, with an eye on re-election and his legacy, will want to keep the markets strong and stable. High-profile firms like Goldman Sachs have echoed this sentiment, noting that Trump's tariff threats often serve as leverage rather than concrete plans. And given Trump's history of walking back threats once favorable deals are reached, the markets are not easily spooked. 5. Is Wall Street underestimating Trump? Of course, it's worth asking, is Wall Street too relaxed? Trump's rhetoric may feel familiar, but that doesn't guarantee it won't result in action. If he decides to follow through with his 25% tariffs on Mexican goods, the consequences could be severe, especially for industries like automotive and agriculture, which rely heavily on cross-border trade. But for now, Wall Street remains cautiously optimistic. Investors trust that Trump's actions will align with his pro-business reputation and that any drastic measures will be tempered by his economic advisors. Final thoughts: a calculated calm. Trump's tariff threats may have rattled global markets, but on Wall Street, the mood is surprisingly calm. Investors are betting on Trump's predictability and his desire to maintain a strong economy. His reputation as a deal-maker precedes him, and many believe that the threats are simply a bargaining chip. Ultimately, while the stakes are high, the markets have learned to read between the lines. Whether Trump's hardline tactics will yield results or backfire remains to be seen. But for now, Wall Street is playing it cool, waiting to see how the next chapter in this high-stakes game of trade unfolds. Next, let's focus on Romania's political shakeup. Nationalist candidate spurs recount drama. Today's major international headlines are buzzing about a political shocker in Romania. According to Reuters, the Romanian Constitutional Court has ordered a recount of all votes from the first round of the presidential election. Why? Because an unexpected winner, Clin Georgescu, an obscure nationalist with pro-Russian leanings, has emerged victorious, rattling the nation and deepening its political crisis. What happened? In a move that stunned political analysts, Georgescu, running as an independent, managed to win the first round of voting. His campaign strategy was unconventional. He gained traction primarily through TikTok, appealing to younger voters and those disillusioned with Romania's political establishment. His victory is already being called the most significant political upset since the fall of communism in Romania. According to Reuters, the Constitutional Court's judges will reconvene in Bucharest after the recount on Friday to decide whether to certify the election results. The stakes are high, as Georgescu's rise signals a seismic shift in the country's political landscape. A closer look at Georgescu's politics. Georgescu has been labeled an extreme right figure by Romanian media, mainly because of his pro-Russian stance and opposition to aid for Ukraine. His nationalist rhetoric and criticism of the European Union have raised concerns in Brussels, with many fearing that his leadership could tilt Romania's foreign policy in a more isolationist direction. But what does it really mean to call someone right-wing or left-wing in this context? That's where things get tricky. The problem with left and right labels. Discussing political ideologies, especially in a global context, can be confusing because left and right mean different things in different countries. In Romania, Georgescu is considered far-right for his nationalist, pro-Russia stance. In contrast, in other parts of the world, those same positions might not fit neatly into the right-wing box. For example, in China, the so-called rightists persecuted during Mao Zedong's era were essentially moderates who remained loyal to communist ideals but opposed certain factions within the party. Their ideology would likely have little in common with today's European right-wing movements. The takeaway? Political labels are highly contextual and should be understood within the framework of each country's unique political history and culture. In Romania, Georgescu's win reflects a deeper tension between pro-European and pro-Russian factions, a legacy of its communist past. What's next for Romania? Whether the recount will overturn Georgescu's victory remains uncertain. However, the situation underscores a broader reality: pro-Russian sentiment still has a foothold in many former communist countries. When political or economic conditions shift, these factions can resurface and gain traction quickly. Georgescu's success, even if short-lived, is a reminder that populist and nationalist movements can thrive when mainstream parties fail to address voter frustrations. Romania's political future may hinge on whether traditional parties can adapt, or whether figures like Georgescu will continue to disrupt the status quo. Final thoughts: a tipping point for Romania? This unfolding drama in Romania is not just about one election. It's a reflection of deeper societal divides and a test of the country's democratic institutions. As Europe watches closely, Romania's next steps will likely have far-reaching implications for both its internal stability and its role in the broader geopolitical landscape. For now, all eyes are on Bucharest. Will Georgescu's rise mark a turning point, or just a temporary blip? Only time will tell. Next, let's focus on two pieces of news about Russia. Today, two significant developments from Russia are making headlines. Let's break down what's happening and why it matters. 1. Russia strikes Kiev's power grid again. For the second time this month, Russia launched a major airstrike on Kiev's power infrastructure. According to the Kremlin, this attack was in retaliation for Ukraine's use of Western-supplied missiles from the US, UK, and France to strike targets within Russian territory. Putin's message is clear: Ukraine will face consequences for targeting Russian soil. These strikes are part of a broader strategy to disrupt Ukraine's energy supply as winter approaches, aiming to weaken morale and put pressure on the civilian population. While Kiev has managed to restore power relatively quickly after previous attacks, the ongoing assaults highlight Russia's determination to cripple Ukraine's infrastructure and maintain pressure on the battlefield. 2. The ruble's sudden freefall. In a more alarming financial development, the Russian ruble suffered a dramatic 8.5% drop against the US dollar in a single day. This marks one of the steepest one-day declines in recent years, with the exchange rate now standing at 114.76 rubles per dollar. To put this into perspective, at the start of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the ruble had already plummeted to 66 rubles per dollar, which many thought was a catastrophic drop. Today's rate means the currency has nearly doubled its losses, reflecting deepening economic instability. What's causing the ruble's collapse? The primary driver behind this sharp decline is increased US sanctions. The US Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control (OFAC) recently announced new sanctions targeting Russia's financial sector, including Gazprombank, a key player in Russia's energy transactions. Over 50 Russian banks and financial institutions, including mid-sized banks that handle domestic and international transactions. 40-plus securities firms and 15 senior financial officials. These sanctions are designed to cut off Russia's access to global financial markets and limit its ability to fund the war in Ukraine. The expanded measures are hitting Russia where it hurts most, its financial and energy sectors, the backbone of its economy. Next, let's focus on Trump's latest two personnel appointments. Today, two key appointments from Trump's camp are making waves. Both picks could significantly shape US trade and foreign policy, particularly in dealing with China and the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Let's break down who they are and what their stances signal for the future. 1. Jamieson Greer, the new trade representative. Trump has tapped Jamieson Greer as the US trade representative. If you remember Robert Lighthizer from Trump's first term, known for his tough stance on China, Greer seems poised to take things even further. According to Bloomberg, the headline reads, "Trump's trade chief advocates strategic decoupling from China." This alone signals a more aggressive approach than even Lighthizer. While many US officials avoid explicitly using the term decoupling, Greer isn't holding back. His strategy includes ending China's permanent normal trade relations. PNTR Greer is pushing Congress to revoke China's favorable trade status, aligning with current legislative efforts. Blocking Chinese goods via third countries. He wants to close loopholes where Chinese products enter the US through nations like Mexico or Canada. Protecting US companies from economic coercion. Greer believes Congress should pass laws to shield American businesses from Chinese retaliation, such as China's previous moves to halt US soybean imports during trade tensions. Expanding export controls. He advocates tightening restrictions on tech exports to China, particularly in sectors like semiconductors, AI, and quantum computing. Restricting US investment in China. Greer wants a comprehensive ban on US investments in China's critical tech industries to prevent feeding China's technological advancements. My take. Greer's appointment is a clear message: Trump's trade war with China is not only continuing, but escalating. His focus on strategic decoupling shows that US-China relations could enter a more adversarial phase. While decoupling may protect US industries, it could also disrupt global supply chains and increase costs for American consumers. Balancing national security concerns with economic realities will be key. 2. Keith Kellogg, the Ukraine-Russia Special Envoy. In another high-profile move, Trump named Keith Kellogg as Special Envoy for Ukraine and Russia. This choice has drawn significant attention, given Trump's claim that he can swiftly end the Ukraine war. Kellogg is a retired general who served as National Security Advisor to Vice President Mike Pence during Trump's first term. Trump praised him on his Truth Social platform, highlighting Kellogg's military and strategic acumen. Keith has excelled in both military and business roles, including serving in sensitive national security positions during my administration. Together, we will secure peace through strength and make the world safe again. Kellogg's stance on Ukraine. Kellogg's position on Ukraine is nuanced but clear. Support Ukraine to strengthen negotiation power. He believes the US should continue supporting Ukraine to ensure it negotiates from a position of strength. Push for negotiations. While advocating for military aid, he insists that Ukraine must eventually sit at the table with Russia. Endless warfare isn't the solution. What's the controversy? Different factions have seized on parts of Kellogg's statements to push conflicting narratives. Some highlight his call for continued aid, while others emphasize his push for immediate talks. For example, pro-Ukraine voices cite Kellogg's criticism of Biden for being slow in authorizing strikes on Russian targets, arguing that earlier action could have given Ukraine more leverage. Critics accuse him of appeasement, pointing to his insistence on freezing the conflict and delaying Ukraine's NATO membership as a path to peace. Why Kellogg's appointment matters. Trump's selection of Kellogg reflects a strategy focused on realpolitik, using leverage to force negotiations while avoiding prolonged conflict. Kellogg's approach isn't about conceding to Russia, but about freezing hostilities and creating a framework for a long-term resolution. As Trump's second-term agenda takes shape, Kellogg's appointment signals that any peace effort will hinge on hard-nosed negotiations rather than unconditional support for Ukraine. My perspective. Kellogg's pragmatic stance could resonate with a war-weary public. However, critics will need assurances that his approach won't embolden Putin. The key question remains, can peace be achieved without compromising Ukraine's sovereignty? Balancing strength and diplomacy will be critical. Final thoughts. Both Greer and Kellogg bring strong, no-nonsense approaches to their roles. Greer's hardline stance on China signals more intense trade battles ahead, while Kellogg's focus on negotiated peace in Ukraine offers a potential off-ramp from a protracted war. For Trump, these appointments underscore a commitment to peace through strength and an America First agenda. Whether these strategies succeed will depend on execution and the willingness of all parties to engage in tough but necessary compromises. US inflation and GDP data, what it means for the Fed and Wall Street. Today's release of the Personal Consumption Expenditures, PCE, a price index, the Federal Reserve's preferred inflation gauge, caught the attention of Wall Street and policymakers alike. Let's break down what the numbers mean and why they're stirring up debate about the Fed's next move. Key data breakdown: steady but persistent inflation. The October PCE price index rose by 0.2% month-over-month and 2.3% year-over-year, matching Wall Street's expectations. When food and energy, known for their volatility, are excluded, the core PCE climbed 0.3% month-over-month and hit 2.8% year-over-year, up from 2.7% in September. This signals that while inflation may not be accelerating, it's still stubbornly above the Fed's 2% target. The underlying message? Prices aren't cooling fast enough, which leaves both Wall Street and the Fed in a tricky spot. Wall Street's dilemma: hopes versus reality. The financial world was hoping for clearer signs of cooling inflation to justify anticipated rate cuts. Many investors have already priced in a 25 basis point rate cut in December and even more easing in January. But today's data complicates that narrative. Why? Because any premature rate cuts could signal that the Fed is willing to tolerate higher inflation, something it has been adamant about avoiding. The core PCE sitting at 2.8% means the Fed is still far from its target. If the Fed holds off on cuts, it risks deflating market optimism, causing stocks and other assets to give back recent gains. Fed's balancing act: stay the course or pivot. The Fed faces a delicate balancing act. Cut rates too soon, and it risks stoking inflation expectations. Wait too long, and it risks choking off economic growth. While Wall Street may be rooting for rate cuts, even seasoned investors recognize that the Fed's hands are tied unless inflation cools more substantially. My take? The Fed likely won't rush into cuts. They've been consistent in their messaging: inflation control comes first. And given the strength of the economy, evidenced by today's GDP data, they have little reason to ease just yet. GDP data adds to the complexity. In tandem with the inflation report, the Commerce Department released its second estimate of Q3 GDP growth, 2.8%, unchanged from the initial reading. Consumer spending, the backbone of US economic growth, was up 3.5%, reflecting robust demand despite higher prices. This continued strength in consumer spending further justifies the Fed's cautious stance. If Americans keep spending at this pace, inflationary pressures could persist, making rate cuts even riskier. Wall Street's adjustment, accepting the new reality? Today's data is forcing investors to recalibrate their expectations. The idea of a December rate cut is now looking less likely, and whispers of no cuts until next year are growing louder. While disappointing for some, it's not all doom and gloom. A resilient economy can support corporate earnings, even if rate cuts are delayed. In fact, markets thrive on certainty, and while today's data doesn't provide a green light for cuts, it does give clarity the Fed will act responsibly. Investors can plan accordingly. What's next? All eyes will now turn to upcoming economic reports ahead of the Fed's December meeting. Any surprises could shift expectations again, but for now, Wall Street seems to be bracing for a wait-and-see approach. If inflation cools further, cuts may still be on the table. But for now, patience is the name of the game. This evolving landscape is a reminder that investing isn't just about chasing returns, it's about navigating uncertainty, and today's data is a masterclass in doing just that. Next, let's focus on Vietnam's real estate mogul offered a lifeline: pay $11 billion or face execution. In a stunning development reported by Bloomberg, Vietnam's richest real estate tycoon, Trung My Lan, has been given a controversial ultimatum: repay $11 billion to the government, and her death sentence will be commuted. This bizarre twist has captured global attention, raising questions about the nature of justice and politics in Vietnam. The offer: pay to live. Trung My Lan, previously convicted and sentenced to death for allegedly amassing $16.4 billion in illegal wealth, now finds herself in negotiations with the Vietnamese government. The deal? Return $11 billion and keep $5.4 billion. This raises an obvious question: if all the funds were illicit, why allow her to retain over $5.4 billion? The inconsistencies suggest a deeper story, and Bloomberg's follow-up investigation reveals exactly that. The political backdrop: a power struggle in disguise. According to Bloomberg, Trung's case is tied to Vietnam's internal political power plays. Much of the alleged wealth she managed came from dealings linked to previous government officials now out of favor. Essentially, Trung is being scapegoated, a narrative strikingly similar to China's anti-corruption campaigns, where business figures often fall victim to shifting political winds. This suggests that her prosecution may have less to do with actual wrongdoing and more to do with settling political scores. The real deal: $400 million to save her life. Despite the headline figure of $11 billion, the actual amount Trung is expected to pay is $400 million. Bloomberg reports that this is the sum agreed upon in a behind-the-scenes negotiation. The remaining balance? Purely theoretical and, conveniently, considered repaid by authorities. Trung has reportedly turned to her international network to secure the funds, with the payment expected soon. Once Vietnam receives the money, her death sentence will be lifted. A justice system in question. This case underscores the fragility of the rule of law in Vietnam. The way the legal outcome hinges on political calculations rather than judicial fairness paints a troubling picture. It highlights how legal decisions can be weaponized, with outcomes determined by those in power rather than by due process. My take? This isn't just about Trung, it's a reflection of a system where financial negotiations can override legal judgments. For those doing business in politically sensitive regions, it serves as a stark reminder of how precarious fortunes can be when tied to shifting political landscapes. In the end, Trung My Lan's story is more than a legal drama. It's a cautionary tale of how power, politics, and money intertwine in ways that can determine life or death. Whether Vietnam's leadership sees this as a one-time deal or a precedent for future justice remains to be seen. Next, let's dive into Trump's tariff threats, unpacking the big picture and what it means for global trade. Let's take a closer look at Morningstar's latest report, which dives into the fallout from Trump's recent tariff threats targeting Canada, Mexico, and China. This isn't just political posturing. Financial experts, particularly from Deutsche Bank, are treating it as a serious development with wide-ranging implications. Trump's rhetoric may seem familiar, but his timing, targets, and tactics are generating a unique buzz across markets. Let's break it down, incorporating Deutsche Bank strategist George Saravello's 10 key insights and my observations on what this means for global trade and the economy. 1. No trade deal is sacred. Trump's threats have shattered any illusion of stability around the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, a trade pact he himself negotiated. This move sends a clear message: no agreement, even one brokered by Trump, is off-limits for renegotiation or cancellation. 2. A signal to markets: tariffs first, not tax cuts. Trump's nomination of Scott Bessent as Treasury Secretary initially suggested a shift toward tax cuts rather than tariffs. However, this latest threat reaffirms that tariffs remain a top priority. It's a direct message to markets: don't expect a soft approach on trade, even with new leadership at the Treasury. 3. Strategic targeting of the Big Three. Why Canada, Mexico, and China? Together, these three countries account for 40% of America's total trade. Targeting them allows Trump to impact a significant share of the US trade balance, making this an efficient way to maximize leverage early in his term. 4. Flexing executive power. Trump is also signaling to Congress that he intends to use his executive powers to implement tariffs. By invoking the International Emergency Economic Powers Act (IEPA), he's reminding lawmakers that he doesn't need their approval to move forward. This is a strategic move to avoid delays and pushback. 5. Immigration and drug policy as cover. While Trump has cited immigration and drug trafficking as reasons for these tariffs, Deutsche Bank views this as a negotiation tactic. The real goal is to pressure these countries on trade, using politically charged issues to strengthen his position. 6. Aligning with congressional momentum on China. Trump's proposed 10% tariff on Chinese goods aligns with ongoing efforts in Congress to revoke China's Most Favored Nation (MFN) status. This synergy could help push through tougher trade measures and build bipartisan support for his policies. 7. Cutting off backdoor routes. Trump is also addressing China's strategy of routing goods through Mexico and Canada to bypass tariffs. By targeting these countries early, he's sealing off potential loopholes and sending a warning to other nations considering similar tactics. 8. Underestimating Canada's vulnerability. Deutsche Bank believes that the impact on Canada has been underestimated. Trump's tariffs would hit Canadian industries hard, challenging the assumption that allies are immune to his trade policies. This underscores Trump's commitment to America First economics. 9. Market skepticism. Despite the bold threats, markets remain cautiously optimistic. Deutsche Bank predicts that Trump may not fully deliver on these promises, but investors should remain vigilant. The stakes are high, and any miscalculation could ripple across global markets. 10. Truth Social as the new power platform. Trump's choice to announce these tariffs on Truth Social signals a shift in how he plans to communicate major policies. Just as he used Twitter in his first term, expect Truth Social to become a central hub for his administration's messaging. What this means for the global economy. Trump's strategy is not just about trade, it's a bold declaration of economic warfare aimed at reshaping global supply chains. This aggressive approach raises important questions. Is isolationism the new normal? Trump's policies reflect a broader shift toward economic nationalism. In the US, isolationism isn't necessarily a negative term, it dates back to George Washington's warning against foreign entanglements. Today, it resonates with voters weary of globalization's downsides. Balancing protectionism and engagement. Trump's vision isn't about cutting off the US from the world, it's about strategic disengagement, selectively pulling back to protect domestic interests while maintaining global influence. This approach mirrors Deng Xiaoping's hide and bide strategy, focusing on internal strength before external engagement. The cyclical nature of US foreign policy. US foreign policy has always oscillated between interventionism and isolationism. Trump's rise marks a return to isolationist ideals, driven by a desire to prioritize domestic issues and reduce foreign entanglements. Economic pragmatism over ideology. At its core, Trump's trade policy is transactional. It's not about ideology, but about securing better deals for the US. However, this approach risks alienating allies and triggering retaliatory measures that could harm global stability. Final thoughts. Trump's tariff threats are a high-stakes gamble with global consequences. While some may see it as bluster, the underlying strategy is clear: reshape the global economic order to favor American interests. Whether this approach succeeds or backfires will depend on how effectively Trump can navigate the complexities of international trade and diplomacy. What's your take on Trump's bold moves? Let's discuss in the comments. That's all for today. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more updates. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.